Hi everyone, I painted a watermelon for a tutorial. This is mainly for beginners and for my YouTube channel, also for Patreon. I will share it there. And all the colors that I used are from the Daniel Smith range of watercolors. I had these beautiful sheets of watercolor dots that I tested for this tutorial. So let's start painting. I used my Stillman Birn watercolor sketchbook. I'm just going to sketch it on this pad. I ordered this from overseas, this Stillman Birn watercolor sketchbook. I'm not too fond of the paper, and I will show you once I finish this painting why I am not fond of it. And that's the only reason. Also, I can't really scrub on this paper with my Fabriano and my art hot press watercolor paper. I can scratch on the paper or scrub on the paper. I'm not scratching on the paper. I mean, I can scrub on the paper with my brush and it will not lift off some of the fibers except if I scratch very hard or I scrub very hard. But for this, you can just slightly move your brush over the paper and you can already see the little woolly bits where it lifted off some of the paper or it, disturbed some of the fibers of the paper. And this is the quick sketch of the watermelon. If you want, I will give you a line drawing of this. You can just let me know in the comments below. But if not, you can just draw your own. It's pretty easy to just draw like a half moon and then just add all the detail in to create this sort of watermelon. Half one. I love watermelon, it's one of my favorite fruits. I want to use bright reds and pinks for the watermelon. I also want it to blend and I want to create a little bit more texture because some of these watercolors are semi-staining or semi-transparent, transparent and opaque watercolors. But mainly, most of the colors that I use today are semi-transparent. I just want to show you, if you're not sure what I mean when I talk about semi-transparent and transparent watercolors, because if you are a beginner, it's not something that you think about or even consider while you're painting in watercolor. Now, if you look at most of your watercolor charts, you will find a watercolor chart of most watercolors online. So for instance, you will find Winsor Newton, Daniel Smith, Core watercolors. You will find for most brands all of the colors online. And when I talk about transparent watercolors, yes, Mr. Robin is right here. When I talk about watercolors, transparent watercolors or opaque watercolors or semi-transparent watercolors, it's normally this that you look at, and you can find that on the back of your tubes too. It will show you it is transparent, semi-transparent or opaque. So opaque, it will be a full circle or a full triangle. It depends on which one you look at, because I think Winsor Newton has little triangles. And then this is transparent and semi-transparent. And most of the colors that I use, now if you go back to the colors, say for instance I used the quinacridone coral for this, it is a transparent watercolor right there. Now if you look at the, let me just see what other color I used the Perylene Scarlet. Yes, I used this Perylene Scarlet, which is a semi-transparent watercolor. So these are the, when I talk about transparent or semi-transparent or semi-staining watercolors, this is normally where you look at. The staining, you will always see the staining on the bottom there. So number one is non-staining. You'll see those on the tubes. Number two is low staining. Number three is medium staining. And four is high staining. So also granulation. So these are all the things that you can look at. But if you're a beginner, I know it's not necessarily something that you want to look at, but it is very important in my style of painting because I most of the time use transparent or semi-transparent watercolors. And this is the bright green that I want for the outside of the watermelon. So you're not going to see a lot of the green on the outside of the watermelon, watermelon, but you will see this little section right here. And I want to create those little markings that I can see, but I also want to leave some of the paper to shine through at the bottom, so I can go over it later with a little bit more color, but I'm in charge of all of the highlights and lighter sections on this little section of the skin or the outside of the watermelon. I always have tissue paper handy and then my 3 glasses of water at the top there. And you can see just by mixing the green or cleaning the green my brush, I already stained my water or dirtied my water. Not stained it, dirtied my water. So this is the line drawing. And now I might have a little bit of the pigment on my brush, but that doesn't matter. It is just for the outside of this little section that I can see the green. So I'm going to go slowly over that section. And like I said in the beginning, the paper is not my favorite paper. But for the study, I wanted to have all of the colors on the right hand side there for me. And it's just for today. I just felt like I had to paint. I had quite a terrible week the last couple of weeks, but I feel a lot better. I'm still very sad about Mr. T, but I thought that I have to paint a little bit today. So I'm going to drop in that bright green mix on there, but you will see that I skip a few sections. So I just drop it in certain parts and then I leave some of the paper light because the skin of this watermelon have little white parts, little white little sections on it. So it's not a full green watermelon, it's all different types. We have loads of different types of watermelon here in South Africa where we live. So the colors are, the skins are all different. And a lot of these have little markings on. Also, they lie in the fields, and there's insects that walk or slugs and snails that make little markings on them. But this one was quite beautiful. Just the beautiful color on the outside of the skin. Now, the minute you wet certain sections of this paper, I found that the water just flood the paper. It's like it absorbs it. Now, it is paper, of course it will do that. But there are sections near the end where I wasn't happy with the way it just flooded the paper, and I wanted those sections to be white. But I can't change it now. I tried to lift some of it, but it is staining watercolors, and unfortunately, I will have to deal with that and just leave it there. And for this, I use the tip of my brush just to outline this. So this is just a sketchbook. It's not perfect lines. This is just for fun until I paint it one day on some proper watercolor paper. But for fun, I just, did a quick sketch of this watermelon on in my sketchbook. And the yellow that I'm going to use is this cadmium yellow light U. So I just want a drop of that for these lighter little parts next to the green. I'm going to water it down quite a bit. Clean water. And then I just go over there and I soften it. Now I don't want it to be too dark, so a lot of water on my brush here, but I don't want to flood the whole page. So I would say it's wet, but it's not sopping wet. And I want to take that green, light green yellow mix around this whole section on the bottom. Again, very watery. And I just lift out a little bit more when I go around there. Now, around that top part of that section there. Now, again, if you will notice it's summer, yeah? So obviously my paper dries much quicker than it would when it's maybe cloudy and more humid. When it's very dry, your paper dry much quicker and it's hot. So today my paper dry very quickly and I have to wet it often. So if it is raining by you and your paper take much longer to dry, you can use a hair dryer to dry your paper quicker. Or if it's very humid, even winter months, I find that my paper dry it take much longer to dry. So in that case, I just use my hair dryer to dry my paper. You can just see all of the beautiful colors right next to me on the right hand side. And for this watermelon, I want quite a lot of different colors, at least 3 or 4 different colors that I want to use on these red parts for the watercolor, for the watermelon. Oh my gosh, today I'm going to have one of those days again. But anyway, so I'm going to use the quinacridone coral for the first little section on the whole watermelon because I want that color to be the first color to layer down, and I also want to make sure that that layer shine through all of the layers that I'm going to paint. So it is a semi-transparent watercolor, so it should show some of the bottom layers as soon as I paint a little bit more over it. So you can just see I have to move my brush around because the paper just dries very quickly. And I also don't want any hard lines, so I'm just trying to soften it and move my brush over it and then drop in the color, pick up some water, and then just quickly soften those lines again. I don't mind all of the texture, but I don't necessarily want hard lines at this stage. So I want all of the layers to be sort of smooth with a little bit of texture, if that makes sense, because that is exactly what I want. But the paper dries quickly, so I have to be careful. Now the paper is still a bit wet, and I immediately go in and I just drop in some of that beautiful, let me see which color I use. I think I used the Perylene red mix for this section. It is more, yes, sorry, it's a permanent red mix that I used. You can use either the Perylene red or the permanent red. They're very similar. I made some swatches on the right hand side underneath my, or next to my hand there. And I'm just dabbing it on the paper, and then I will pick up water and immediately soften it again because I do not want it to go into those yellow parts as well. So I make sure that I don't have too much water on my brush. And then I just smooch it away from those yellow sections, and I dab it on some tissue paper so that I don't get any of those colors on the lighter part, because I do want to keep that as light as possible. For this part, I'm just going to go around the sides there, and again you can just see the hard lines immediately that I created there, which I'm going to have to soften at a later stage. Again, following this shape of the watermelon. So you will see that I go in different directions in certain parts. I will go more the angle on the edges, and then I leave some of the light of the paper to shine through like that. Don't want to paint over them right now because I want that to soak into the paper. So I want this paper to the color to I want the paper to soak up the color so that it stains the paper. So that when I go over it later on, it will shine through all of the layers that I'm going to add at a later stage. And then I just smooth around those edges there again, taking the darker colors and just dropping it in. And I'm just wiggling my brush all over this section here. If I want any lighter parts, I just lift it out with my brush. I'm going to grab my tissue. This was the green mix that I had on there. Going to use that and just use my paper and lifting out some of the darker colors with my brush. So I just dry my brush on the tissue paper and it will soak up all of those colors. Let me move the green close by, and I want a little bit of that green. And while those sections are wet, I want to make this slightly thicker. Then I'm going to go in with my water brush and I'm just going to wet it and soften it immediately. Try and keep it as light as possible. I don't want it to be too dark. I want a very soft green mix there. Again, on the darker sides, I want a darker edge there. Wet it, soften it. And then I'm going to drop in some of the color while the paper is wet so it can flow into those little sections. And keep an eye on it because I want to move it around with my brush. I don't want it to touch the pink necessarily right now. It might still be wet. On this part too, I'm going to wet it, pick up some of the green and just touch it on the edges there, and it will flow into those wet parts. And then I'm just going to wet my brush again, rinse it clean, and then lift out some of the excess pigment. And this side too, and I'm going to go around the corners there with some of the green just to darken those parts again. I actually like the way the watermelon is at this stage, but I'm going to go in and add more detail. I want to add in all of those pips, and you can just see what happened there. I messed some of the pigment on the paper and I'm trying to lift it out with my brush. Now this is where it stained the paper. I'm not very happy with that, but it's nothing I can do. I didn't use my magic eraser because it is my sketchbook, and it will just remind me next time to be careful when I use the sketchbook, and be mindful when I drop pigment or I drop any color or touch anywhere where there's still wet paint, so that I remember it next time. But again, I'm going to wet these little parts. Want it to blend in nicely, and it actually looks quite cute. Now I'm looking for a brighter red, so a little bit darker. I might use, so I'm going to use this Perylene Scarlet. I might use some alizarin crimson, but this is quite a nice color. So the Perylene Scarlet from Daniel Smith. It is a semi-transparent color, and I'm going to mix quite a bit. So you can get quite a lot of color from these dot cards from Daniel Smith. The watercolor dots that they have on these cards, you can get quite a lot if you want to test your colors before you buy any big tubes. They are very handy. I love these colors. And what I want to do is I want to now go in with a darker mix, and you will see that I leave some of the paper underneath light. So I leave little highlight sections. Some parts are much darker than other sections, and I'm just using my brush to create those little markings. And you'll see I will soften it at a later stage with a bit more water or a bit more color. Might do a glaze over it just to soften those little markings. And again, darker on this section. So it's a lot more color on my brush now, much thicker consistency. I haven't watered it down too much, and I'm now using only the water to smooth out and soften those little sections here. And now I'm going to use my brush just to soften those little hard lines that formed on those parts there. And I don't mind if some of the pink flow in there, as long as it looks like a watercolor. Oh my gosh. As long as it looks like a watermelon, I do not mind. And then I just use my brush to soften those little markings. I'm going right against the edges there. I want it quite dark here, close to me, because the other edge is further away from me. The parts are very juicy. And for this sketchbook, it was quite expensive, okay, especially importing it. And the postage was very, or delivery courier fee was very expensive. So, and I've seen better quality. I wouldn't say it's not better quality, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not better quality. I'm just saying you can't really scrub on the paper. Maybe you find it perfect for you, you love the paper. I just find for my style of painting, I like to use my brush to scrub on the paper a bit, sometimes to soften little markings, and I find that it lifts up the fibers of the paper. And also the fact that I had a bit of water on my brush near the green sections at the bottom, which I will show you at a later stage when I do the glaze, and that then went onto the white parts of the paper. And now normally I can lift it out with my scrubber brush and a tissue paper, and it will be neat and tidy because I like it to be nice and white and tidy and clean, but not with this paper. I couldn't get the staining parts of this watercolor out of the paper. So this is how far we are for now, and I'm going to leave it for a section to dry, for a section, for a second to dry. Okay. While the pink part is drying, I'm going to go in with a very, very fine brush. This is a 003 brush or a double. Use a very small brush. Doesn't matter what 00 or whatever it is, just as long as it's small. And I'm going to just pick up, you can see the pigment on the plate is very, very thick. I don't have a lot of water on there because I want it to be very dark. As I paint and I get nearer to the end, nearer to the finish line, my pigment is a lot less watery. So at this stage, we use very thick watercolors. And I'm just trying to go as neatly as I can around this section here. The paper is buckling, it is not stretched on a watercolor block, so it is buckling slightly where it was wet. It's a bit difficult to get the lines very straight. You can wait for your watercolor painting to dry completely and then just put a book on it to stretch it again so it's nice and straight. But I'm going to paint and finish this painting, and it's just like I said before, my sketchbook. I'm going to darken all of these parts, and I'm going to leave some of the lighter parts that I left earlier as light as possible. Still going to leave it very, very light. So at this stage, this is how far we are, and I've changed the angle because I want to show you a close-up of the detail that I'm going to paint in right now. So it's very, very close and very thick watercolors on my brush, not too much water, and I'm just dabbing in all of the color, going slightly over those little lighter parts. I don't want it to be too big, and I also don't want it to be too light. Trying to create those little markings. And I want to go around the edge here with a thick color, very dark color, just to neaten it up a bit. Very hard to do that when your paper buckles. And I'm shaky, so that doesn't help either. But do our best. And as you can see, I'm not happy with what happened on the paper on the sides there. So I'm trying to neaten it up a bit. Now with expensive, more pricey watercolors, not that this book wasn't expensive, but with, for instance, Fabriano and Arch hot press watercolor paper, these are the brands that I can find here that are quite quite good. You can scrub on them, and especially the blocks, you don't need to stretch them necessarily if you don't use too much water. Anyway, we'll talk about that at a different stage, different time. I do have a video of that on my YouTube channel and on my Patreon channel where I talk about paper. But now I'm just using a watery mix, and I'm going around these little parts because I do want to take some of the green in on these whiter light parts that I had here earlier. And Tyson is here by me, disturbing my voiceover. So this is how far we are now, and we are going to leave it to dry completely because now I want to go in with a darker color to mix the darker sections of the pip sections. I don't know what you call those little parts, but it's the darker parts where I'm going to add in some darker color and then add in the black little pips. So I used the permanent alizarin crimson mix from Daniel Smith, and it is a transparent watercolor for this section, and there's also alizarin crimson. So these two different colors that I have on this paper. Also check if my paper is dry completely, so I don't mind if it's slightly wet because it will just flood a little bit or flow everywhere a little bit, and I don't mind that. But I also want to have little parts where it's a bit more sort of thicker and not blended in. I can always blend it with my brush. So yeah, I just lift out some of the color. I don't want it to be too dark, and I take some of the lines like a half moon and not a full moon, and then I soften it with some clean water. And this part two, just taking it to the bottom there, and then it just lifts up too much. If there's too much pigment, I just left out some of the pigment. So this is my paint spray that I always have separately in a little bowl next to me. So you can either mix your own black, or you can just use paint spray from the holder or from the tube, whatever you have. And I'm just going to drop this in on the paper, and you'll see that I just draw these. I don't know what you would call those, but they're like little lines, and then a little bit more thicker towards the center of the pup. I'm trying to create those little pups. I don't have watermelon with me right now, so I'll have to just imagine it. But these little markings are very similar to what I want for my watermelon to look like, these little pups. So just here and there, some of them are half, and some of them are a little bit fuller. And this is really a fun tutorial or study to do in your sketchbook just for fun. And I'm going to show you the colors. This is the brush that I use, my Kum Memory Point brush for the pips, and for certain sections I also use my Venus round brush. They're very similar size, and that is the color that I use, the quinacridone coral that I used, and then I use some of the perylene red and the permanent red, a mix of both of those. And then this is the perylene scarlet, also beautiful colors you can use. And you can actually use some of the quinacridone red, the carmine, the rose madder permanent is also a beautiful color. Lovely colors that you can use on this sheet. And this is the Daniel Smith Extra Fine Watercolors 5 sheet 266 colors to try. I'm not sure what the name is of this one exactly, but it has yellow and all the red and orange mixes on here, so it's beautiful colors to taste. And I'm just going to go over with some of the red over the black pips that I painted in. And just darken over those sections just to create those indents. Playing some mind tricks on everyone. Create those darker little sections even if there isn't any darker sections there. I would like to try this one day on some proper paper. Please, I'm not saying this paper is not good. I'm just saying for me, I battle with the paper. And that is, my opinion. It is not, it might not be anyone else's opinion. But ever since I bought this book, I've been struggling with it, and I've had it for quite a long time. So I just use it for certain studies. For this section, I want to go and darken these little parts again, but I want to be careful. I don't want to go over those little paint gray markings now, because that will just flood everywhere if I waited too much. So I'm going around these parts very carefully with my brush, because I want to darken it and make it a little bit more juicy. And that is the consistency that I want on my plate. Oops, and I messed even more. So I think this is also where the mess came in, because I messed on the paper. And then I just picked up some my tissue paper and tried to clean certain sections. But again, it's my sketchbook and I don't mind it. And I'm leaving some of the sections as light as I can, so some of those beautiful quinacridone coral colors shine through the bottom layers. So I'm adding the darker layer over this layer. Of course, it's a lot thicker than the first layers that I painted on. And I'm just using my brush to wiggle it up and down, trying to create those realistic little sections that you can see on a watermelon. Now, some watermelons are very light and pink, and some are very red and juicy. Sometimes they look very red and juicy and they're not nice at all. have like a flowery taste, and I definitely prefer a beautiful, juicy, firm watermelon. Now I'm going to go with the darker mix again around these little sections very carefully with my brush. And as soon as I notice some darker markings that I don't want, I will just lift it out with my brush. I'm going to hold the brush flat again, and then I'm just creating those little sort of segments that I want darker all over the watermelon. At this stage, you don't have to paint any of this in if you are a beginner, if you don't want to, but I'm trying to darken these little parts. This watermelon that I have very dark little sections, and I'm trying to create that on my paper. So just hold the brush at an angle. Any brush will do with a nice tip. And I'm leaving all of those parts to soak into the paper, and I'm going to go back now as soon as I'm done with these little sections and wet it again. Do want some of those lighter beautiful pink sections to shine through that I painted earlier with that beautiful good nacridon coral at the bottom there. And now I'm going to go in, clean my brush, and I'm softening all of these little hard lines that I painted in here, just trying to smooth it out with my brush. So this is a watercolor glaze. My brush is completely clean, and I'm just softening those little sections, smoothing it so it's not disconnected from the rest of the watermelon. So I'm sort of blending it all together. So this is how far we are now. I'm going to leave it to dry completely, and I'm going to use a gel pen. Now this is not waterproof, so I won't necessarily go over it again when I'm done here. This is just adding in some of those lighter shiny bits that you can see on a watermelon that I couldn't paint in at this stage. So I'm going to zoom in a bit so I can show you exactly what I'm doing. So these gel pens don't last long. Mine dry out quickly because I don't use it that often. So every time I do go to the art store, I just buy one because I sometimes paint whiskers, and highlights in on my birds or my dogs, portraits. But I also bought some Winsor Newton ink, some of the white ink, which I will show you at a later stage. I'm going to use some of it. But now I'm just using my white gel pen, and I'm just dabbing it in to create those little white markings that you can see on a watermelon. But it's too difficult to paint each little one of these dots in. Oh, this is the ink, the Winsor Newton ink that you can try. Very nice too. I'm going to taste it now. You can use some of your masking fluid to create those little dots as well, and just paint over it and then remove it at a later stage, which I would definitely try to use one day as another study, but on different paper. Um, but for this, I'm going to use the gel pen now and some of the ink. So I will one day maybe try both, show you both, like how I will paint it with some masking fluid and how I will do it again with this gel pen. But this is the ink that I'm going to use, and I use a small brush, very fine brush, and I'm just going to shake it a bit. I don't use this often, and I'm going to use some of it out of the lid. You can mix some of the water with it just to wet it a bit because it is an ink. If I notice some of the sections are a bit too thick, I just dab my finger on it to lift out some of the excess. But I'm quite happy with how the ink and the gel pen create those little white dots that you can see. Now you can do it all over if you want to, but I'm just going to do it over certain sections. And we have some watermelons in the shop right now, and every time I go I buy one, and it is delicious, especially in the heat of summer, and you put it in the fridge and you take it out for a snack. So delicious. So this is a little holder that I'm going to use. You can just wet it a bit if you want to dilute it a little bit on certain parts. And this is the consistency. You can draw lines, you can dab it on the paper just to create those little dots. And then I left out some of it with my brush. Are you having a bad dream, Tyson, little boy? And then if you're done, you can let it dry completely. I'm going to see if I'm happy with everything right now. You can see it turned out quite pretty. So you can use your gel pen, you can use the gel ink, you can use masking fluid, whatever you want. Just have fun and paint. And here we are. And then I just want to show you the colors again of this painting that I used. I know I talk about all the colors, but you can literally use any colors from Winsor Newton, from Core Watercolors, from any brand that you have. That is the yellow that I use, some of the lighter yellow for those parts as well. You can mix with some of your green. You can use your sap green mixed with a touch of Payne's grey or a bright green if you have any beautiful greens. So this is the finished painting. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you soon with another tutorial.